Imagine standing in the humid marshes of South Texas. On one side, dominating the horizon, is the most advanced machine ever built by human hands. A shimmering 400-foot stainless steel skyscraper designed to make our species immortal. The sheer industrial ambition of the thing takes your breath away. You look at it and expect the hurdles to be equally massive. The laws of physics, the volatility of methane, the crushing difficulty of orbital mechanics. But then you look at the reality of why it's sitting silent on the pad. I was digging through the legal filings that tried to ground this program, expecting to find evidence of catastrophic danger to human life. Instead, I found a debate about the piping plover, a small shorebird. It was a surreal moment of clarity. We have the technology to mine asteroids worth $10,000 quadrillion and build factories in zero gravity, yet the entire endeavor was being held hostage by a clipboard and a bird watcher. That quiet standoff in the marsh represents the real war we are fighting. It isn't a political battle of left versus right. It is a fundamental clash of up versus down.
It made me realize that the biggest threat to our future isn't a lack of resources or technology. It's a philosophy of stagnation that would rather preserve a patch of dirt than let humanity leave the cradle. We're staring at a planetary-scale trolley problem, and right now the people in charge are choosing the bird. That opening image, I think, just perfectly frames the tension we're diving into today. Our mission here is to really analyze this core conflict. On one side, you have this down philosophy, terrestrial conservation, environmental regulation, all that friction. And on the other, you have the up philosophy, this promise of off-world expansion, industrial growth, and this almost post-scarcity abundance. We're going to unpack the real strategic costs of this bureaucratic and environmental drag on these huge space projects. And more importantly, explore the revolutionary economic models that space industrialization actually promises. You really need to know which philosophy is winning and, frankly, what the cost of that victory is.
It's fascinating because what we're seeing is a collision of two highly complex systems, and they're operating at completely different speeds.
Right.
You have, on one side, generations of really detailed Earth economy modeling, all of it dedicated to quantifying the value of, say, biodiversity. And then on the other side, you have this rapid, disruptive commercial space policy trying to develop. It demands we move faster than the existing structures even allow.
So they're just in direct friction.
Direct friction. It's often characterized by public policy experts as a wicked problem.
A wicked problem? That's a great term for this. It sort of implies there's no clean, easy solution.
Exactly.
Yep.
A wicked problem, by its very definition, lacks a clear idea of what success even looks like. There's no definite stop condition. You can't just throw money at it and expect it to go away.
So it's not just complicated, it's entangled.
Deeply. It involves entrenched stakeholders, conflicting values, and just this massive regulatory inertia. Understanding the true cost of this friction is essential because, as your opening suggests, the stakes are, well, they're literally planetary. We're going to show you that the costs of stagnation are just as quantifiable and potentially far, far more catastrophic than the costs of regulation.
Right. Let's start with that down argument.
Yeah.
Because it isn't just a feel-good movement about protecting birds. It's actually backed by some incredibly robust economic modeling that gives a real, quantifiable fiscal strength to nature. We're constantly sold this idea, this false narrative, that economic growth has to come at the expense of environmental protection, that it's a trade-off.
And that narrative, which has, dominated public discourse for decades, is being systematically dismantled by modern economics. The analysis we looked at argues that environmental regulation historically has only imposed modest aggregate costs on the global economy. It's actually ignoring the environment that is now proven to be the far more expensive choice in the long run.
So how do economists prove that? I mean, what kind of system can run global market prices and the health of a rainforest through the same calculator? It sounds almost impossible.
They use something called an integrated Earth economy model. The specific one here is called GTIP Invest.
Okay.
Think of it as linking two massive data engines. Mm-hmm. The GTAP Part Global Trade Analysis Project is this huge database. It details the entire global economy, trade flows, market prices, land use, GDP across dozens of sectors and regions.
And the invest part.
That stands for Integrated Valuation of Environmental Services and Trade-offs. It quantifies the actual provision of specific specific ecosystem services.
What exactly?
Like how many pollinators are active in a certain area, or the real capacity of a forest to sequester carbon. By linking them for the first time, researchers can see how a change in natural capital, let's say deforestation in Brazil, doesn't just affect local biodiversity.
No, ripples out.
It ripples through global market prices for timber, for agricultural goods, even for insurance.
So they run a simulation. What happens if we just keep going as we are, this business as usual scenario?
The prognosis is financially sobering. Under that BAE scenario, the continued degradation of natural capital is projected to result in a global annual GDP loss of $75 billion.
$75 billion? By when?
By the year 2030, and that's in 2014 dollars.
$75 billion lost every single year. How does that happen? What's the actual mechanism of that loss?
The mechanism is the reduction in all these essential services that the Earth provides for free. The model specifically measured 4 of them.
Okay.
The capacity of forests to sequester carbon, the provisioning of timber, the health and output of marine fisheries, and really critically, wild pollination services.
Pollination seems so small, but I guess it's huge.
It's massive. When you lose wild pollinators, your agricultural yields drop. That means you need more chemical inputs or you have to convert more land, which affects prices and regional GDP. When fisheries collapse, entire coastal economies suffer. It reduces trade, local welfare. The analysis is very clear that any conventional economic accounting that ignores these declines is, well, it's fundamentally providing an unrealistically rosy picture of future growth.
The size of that cost is just staggering. But you mentioned it doesn't land evenly, and that brings us right to the critical question of equity.
It really does. The impact of environmental degradation is just an amplifier of global inequality. The GTAP Invest model revealed that low-income countries will suffer a percentage loss in regional welfare that is nearly 3 times larger than what high-income countries feel.
3 times. And that's not a coincidence, it's structural.
It's completely structural. Their economies simply rely far more heavily on sectors that are directly dependent on that natural capital.
Can you give us a concrete example of that disparity?
Sure, take a low-income nation like Bangladesh. The model projected a 2.4% loss in their regional welfare, and that was driven primarily by massive projected losses in their marine fisheries.
For them, fishing isn't a hobby.
No, it's a primary source of protein, of employment, of trade revenue. If that natural capital collapses, the effects are these immediate, dramatic poverty spirals.
Whereas for a high-income nation...
A high-income nation might see a slight increase in food prices, sure. But the core GDP structure dominated by services, finance, tech, it's insulated from that primary impact. So policies that invest in nature, they actually become the most profound equitable strategy available. It's not just an environmental one.
So if doing nothing costs $75 billion a year and hits the world's poor the hardest, what do we gain by actively investing in nature?
The returns are enormous. The models show that policies that proactively invest, like payments for ecosystem services or PE schemes where you reward landowners for stewardship, or funding agricultural R&D, they yield annual global gains from $100 to $350 billion relative to that baseline.
$350 billion.
And the R&D policy specifically, that alone generated nearly $200 billion annually in increased GDP.
Why R&D? Why is that so effective?
Because improved agricultural techniques increase your productivity on the land you already have. That reduces the pressure to expand into natural habitats.
You preserve the habitats and the services they provide.
Exactly. And crucially, just like the costs, the largest percentage gains from these investments also go to the lowest income countries. It's an economic booster shot right where it's needed most.
Now let's go from expensive to existential. That $75 billion loss is a controlled scenario. But the real threat, the philosophical justification for the down philosophy, is the risk of these catastrophic ecological tipping points.
Precisely. And that's where the analysis shifts from cost management to pure risk management. The economists modeled what they called a partial ecosystem collapse scenario.
That sounds bad.
It's not the end of the world, but it's a series of interconnected, really severe ecological failures. So imagine a widespread shift of tropical forests to savanna.
Okay.
A 90% reduction in wild pollination services, and a 90% reduction in marine fisheries catch. All of it happening at the same time.
What's the price tag on a disaster like that?
The modeled disaster resulted in estimated GDP losses of $2 trillion.
$2 trillion.
$2 trillion. That's larger than the GDP of entire major economies. And it's a 25-fold increase over the 75 billion BAU baseline. This dramatic escalation shows the enormous risk hidden in what seem like marginal changes. It highlights that putting environmental data firmly into economic analysis isn't optional anymore. It's vital for measuring systemic risk.
And if the potential risk of choosing the bird is preventing a $2 trillion catastrophe, you start to understand the depth of the resistance to expansion.
Yeah.
Okay, that $2 trillion figure is a necessary philosophical weight to carry as we pivot now to the up argument. Because while the down argument deals with existential ecological threats, the up argument deals with existential bureaucratic threats. We mentioned the phenomenal growth rate of commercial space from 36 U.S. launches in 2020 to 117 in 2023. That velocity is just slamming into a policy framework that's still moving at the speed of government mail.
The fundamental problem, it really starts with international law, specifically Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty.
Okay.
Because the vacuum of space is considered a shared global commons, that treaty mandates that governments bear international responsibility and liability for all non-governmental space activities. It's not optional. It requires authorization and continuing supervision.
So unlike developing software or, I don't know, making cars, the government must sign off on every rocket launch, every satellite, every lunar lander.
Exactly. And this requirement mandates far more government oversight than almost any other commercial sector. It inherently injects friction into the system. And this oversight process, as you mentioned, has devolved into a true wicked problem of regulation.
Walk us through the anatomy of that wicked problem in space. What does it look like?
It's a multi-layered mess, you know?
Yeah.
First, you have dual-use technologies. The same rocket engine that launches a commercial satellite can be used for military purposes, which immediately brings in national security stakeholders.
Right.
Second, you have all these overlapping, sometimes contradictory federal agencies. The FAA licenses the launch, the FCC manages spectrum, NOAA handles remote sensing, and then you have the DoD and State Department managing security. It's a crowd.
And they all have different priorities.
Competing priorities. The FAA is mandated to regulate public safety, but also to promote commercial space growth. Trying to optimize for both at the same time is nearly impossible.
Let's get specific on the hurdles, starting with launch and reentry. The government actually tried to fix this with Space Policy Directive 2 back in 2018. That was supposed to streamline everything.
It was intended to be revolutionary. It really was. SPD2 aimed to shift the FAA's approach from a prescriptive model where the regulator tells a company how to be safe
to a performance-based model.
To a performance-based approach where the regulator just specifies what the safety goal is and lets the industry innovate on the solution. The problem was the execution.
How did that good intention turn into more regulatory drag?
The resulting regulations ended up being over 600 pages long.
600.
Because the standards were performance-based, the FAA felt it had to define every possible scenario and risk permutation in excruciating detail to make sure compliance was measurable.
So instead of clarity, the industry got ambiguity.
Massive ambiguity wrapped in hundreds of pages of legalese. It meant licensing applications didn't get faster. They required far more legal work, increasing the cost and the time for approval. So despite the intention, the implementation has been cumbersome, and industry leaders are still pleading for more reforms just to make the process predictable.
And beyond just launching a rocket, you had this huge, years-long debate about authorizing novel activities, things like orbital construction, lunar missions.
This is the mission authorization problem, and it has paralyzed investors for over a decade.
Because no one knows who's in charge.
Exactly. If a company wants to do in-space refueling or remove space debris or send a commercial lander to the moon, which agency has the legal authority to say yes or no? The Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations have all tried and failed to solve this.
Why is it so hard just to assign a lead agency?
Because of the dual-use nature and those overlapping jurisdictions we talked about, the current proposals are fundamentally at odds with each other. For example, the Biden White House proposed splitting it between the Department of Transportation and the Department of Commerce.
That sounds reasonable on paper. Why did industry and Congress hate it?
Because industry wants one single point of contact, a one-stop shop. Splitting the authority creates the risk that a company has to apply to both agencies.
And potentially get contradictory requirements?
Potentially, or just get bogged down in double the bureaucracy. Prominent senators, industry groups, they all criticize the proposal immediately. So what happens is novel missions are just authorized on an experimental or ad hoc basis, which creates immense legal uncertainty for these huge investments.
Okay, let's bring it back to the piping plover, the bird in the marsh. That touches on the environmental scope of regulation, specifically NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act.
Yes, and the environmental scope is where the down and up philosophies clash most visibly. NEPA requires federal agencies to assess the environmental impact of their actions, but current FCC rulings hold that outer space is not an environment covered under NEPA.
Okay, so that helps them avoid a lot of paperwork for the constellations.
It does, but the environmental concerns aren't just about terrestrial launch sites anymore, are they?
No, not at all.
No. Concerns are rapidly mounting about the space environment itself. There's intense debate over physical congestion in key orbits. The risk of collision is an environmental risk. There's the light pollution issue, disrupting ground-based astronomy.
And the new one, the atmospheric composition.
And critically, yes. Emerging research suggests that the reentry of large quantities of metals from all these G-orbiting constellations could significantly impact the composition of the upper atmosphere. If this material acts as an aerosol or creates unwanted chemical reactions, we just haven't quantified the consequences yet.
And all this regulatory uncertainty is just amplified by the current legal climate in the U.S.
Right. That's right. Recent Supreme Court rulings, like West Virginia versus EPA, reinforce what's called the major questions doctrine.
Which means?
It essentially means agencies need explicit, clear authority from Congress for any rules that have huge economic or political significance, like orbital debris mitigation.
So the FCC's authority to even make those rules could be challenged.
And it inevitably will be. And that could force Congress to pass specific legislation, which is a historically glacial process, just slowing down decisive action even more. So to appreciate the scale of the up of abundance, you have to internalize this self-destructive cycle of down-scarcity. Our sources really highlight this destructive resource conflict nexus on Earth. We see this grim paradox over and over. A local abundance of resources, oil, timber, minerals. It doesn't lead to prosperity. It often leads to a rapid descent into scarcity through exploitation and violent conflict.
This is the famous resource curse paradox. Having the natural wealth actually makes you poorer, or at least more unstable.
It's a fundamental failure of governance, of distribution. The wealth often bypasses local residents completely. It fuels corruption at the top and conflict at the base. Studies have shown that even within rapidly developing nations, provinces that are rich in resources often have lower per capita incomes than their resource-poor neighbors.
That juxtaposition of extreme wealth and extreme poverty, it's just explosive. Where do we see this playing out most tragically today?
You see it in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. You have vast oil wealth, about $10 billion in revenue a year for the government and corporations, coexisting with just pervasive poverty and immense environmental devastation.
And this imbalance creates the perfect breeding ground for violent conflict.
Absolutely. It creates this continuous struggle. Local communities, rival ethnic groups, insurgents, government organs, they're all vying for control of the lucrative resource territory. And this is amplified when the resources are lootable, high value, easy to get, like alluvial diamonds or timber. In places like Myanmar or Cambodia, leaders make vast profits from rapid deforestation, while the environmental degradation, soil loss, water contamination, it just increases conflict over the shrinking amount of good land left for farmers.
It's a vicious cycle.
Wealth fuels violence, which fuels environmental destruction. It's a complete inversion of the old belief that human ingenuity always triumphs over resource limits.
That idea from Esther Bozrah, that pressure leads to innovation.
Right. She argued that pressure on agricultural resources naturally leads to innovation. You turn scarcity into abundance. But today, we face a global situation where we have scarcity of natural resources alongside a flood of low-cost manufactured goods. The problem isn't just running out of things, it's the geopolitical instability created by the territorial concentration of critical resources. That scarcity tied to territory is a massive global risk.
So the modern space race really aims to break that scarcity conflict cycle. But this vision of using space to create abundance on Earth isn't new, is it? It has deep roots going back to the 70s.
Not new at all. Back then, space industrialization was defined as using the special properties of space zero-G, hard vacuum, isolation from the biosphere, specifically for the social and economic benefit of people on Earth. The vision wasn't colonization. It was about solving immediate, tangible terrestrial problems.
And what were the big anxieties of the 1970s that space was supposed to solve?
The world was grappling with accelerating population growth, trade imbalances, and this acute fear that we were consuming crucial minerals at an exponential rate.
Right, the limits to growth era.
Exactly. Based on usage projections at the time, 8 crucial minerals were expected to be functionally exhausted within 50 years. Space was positioned as the only economic growth model that didn't depend on more terrestrial exploitation.
They even did the math to link space investment directly to jobs at home, which is something you don't hear as much in the modern debate.
They did. And the economic analysis was politically very pragmatic. It suggested that if U.S. investments in space could contribute just enough to the economic growth of underdeveloped regions to generate two-way trade of a mere $17 per world citizen.
Just $17.
It would result in the creation of 2.7 million new American jobs.
That's a huge number.
According to the modeling, that was enough to reduce U.S. unemployment to 4%. It was a sophisticated argument for expansion as a direct economic stimulus at home.
The technical blueprint also introduced a concept we still talk about today, but we often forget the context: complexity inversion.
Complexity inversion is the key to mass market adoption. The long-term strategy was to put all the expensive, complex infrastructure into space. Large, multi-beam satellites with massive antenna farms, these incredibly complex machines.
And by doing that, you could simplify and shrink the stuff on the ground?
Precisely. That was the magic. Make the user terminals small, simple, and cheap.
Give me an example of that.
Look at the cost of a satellite voice circuit. In 1966, before these large systems were conceptualized, the annual cost was over $20,000. With the large-scale systems they planned for the shuttle era, that cost was projected to drop to a mere $14 per circuit year.
From $20,000 to $14,000.
That massive cost reduction was seen as the only way to deliver widespread benefits, like ubiquitous satellite communication, essentially giving every person a pocket telephone. That historical vision was purely focused on democratizing access through large orbital infrastructure.
So that historical vision focused on services. Today, the paradigm has shifted to physical resources. When we talk about asteroid mining, the numbers, trillions, even quadrillions of dollars. It pushes our economic thinking past scarcity and into this realm of, practical infinity.
That shift in scale is profoundly disruptive. If you look at the immediate terrestrial markets, the biggest disruption will come from the platinum group metals, or PGMs.
Platinum, palladium, rhodium.
All of them. They are essential catalysts for everything from catalytic converters to advanced hydrogen fuel cells. But the supply on Earth is extremely limited and geopolitically concentrated.
And asteroids, specifically the M-type asteroids, are just unbelievably rich in these things.
They're the residual cores of early planetesimals. M-type asteroids are believed to contain PGM concentrations 10 to 20 times higher than the richest mines we have on Earth. And here's the single most staggering detail. A single 500-meter M-type asteroid could contain more platinum than all of Earth's known reserves combined.
One asteroid. If it contains that much, how do you prevent a sudden supply dump from completely collapsing the terrestrial market overnight?
That is the core challenge of managing abundance. It wouldn't necessarily be an overnight collapse, but it would trigger a massive PGM shock.
Is there a historical analogy for that?
Yeah, the massive influx of aluminum in the 19th century. It went from being a precious material used in jewelry to a common industrial commodity because of breakthroughs in refining. Asteroid mining represents that same kind of technological shock for platinum. It fundamentally changes PGMs from a high-cost precious commodity to an affordable industrial workhorse material. It unlocks entire fields of engineering that were just too expensive before.
The other key market disruption comes from rare earth elements, REEs, which are vital for the green energy transition.
Absolutely vital. You need RE for the high-strength permanent magnets in nearly all electric vehicles, wind turbines, advanced electronics. The problem on Earth isn't running out, it's supply security. China currently dominates the global supply chain, controlling nearly 90% of the refining capacity. With demand projected to increase 7-fold by 2040 for clean energy alone, that concentrated supply chain is an immense geopolitical risk.
So space mining liberates the world from that dependency. It provides supply security.
That's the key value proposition. Asteroid resources offer a stable, abundant, politically neutral source. The economic value isn't just in the material itself, it's in the de-risking of global investment.
So automakers, energy companies?
They could all confidently invest massive long-term capital into building out the infrastructure for a decarbonized global economy, secure in the knowledge that their supply of essential materials won't be subject to trade disputes or political instability. That stability, derived from abundance, is revolutionary. The philosophical shift from terrestrial scarcity to off-world abundance, it needs a practical blueprint. And the first step isn't bringing materials down to Earth. It's building a self-sustaining economy in space. This is the core concept of in situ resource utilization, or ISRU.
And the simple business case for ISRU is just the staggering cost of launching from Earth. It costs, what, $2,000 to $20,000 per kilogram to get anything out of our deep gravity well?
Precisely. Bypassing that cost is the foundational market. If you can make something in space for, say, $500 per kilogram equivalent, you've just created a 40x cost advantage for any future space mission. And this makes water ice, which is readily available from C-type asteroids or the lunar poles, the single most strategic asset in the solar system.
Why water? Why not gold or platinum first?
Because water is logistics. It's the fuel for the highway. You crack water ice into hydrogen and oxygen, the basic components of rocket propellant. This lets you create orbital refueling depots.
So instead of launching a rocket that's 90% fuel,
you launch with a minimal fuel load, maximizing your payload, and you just top up at a depot in low Earth orbit. It changes deep space exploration from this exclusive government-led activity into a scalable commercial logistics model.
And once you have the fuel, you need the factories. This is where the metals from S-type and M-type asteroids come into play for in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, or ISAM.
ISAM is the manufacturing revolution that breaks the constraints of Earth launch. Think about every piece of hardware we launch today. It has to be optimized not for its function in space, but for its survival during the launch.
It has to fit in the fairing. It has to withstand all the vibration.
Exactly. We launch rockets full of compromises. ISAM removes that constraint entirely. If you're manufacturing in space with asteroidal metals, your structures can be optimized purely for function in microgravity. You can build solar power arrays that are kilometers wide, or massive space stations assembled component by component without ever needing to survive the violence of a rocket launch. It just unlocks scales that were previously unimaginable.
So beyond just building the infrastructure for space, the unique environment itself, the zero-G, the vacuum, it offers properties for making high-value products that are incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to make on Earth. This is the blueprint for that industrial relocation.
We're talking about manufacturing, where the absence of gravity isn't a novelty, it's a necessary input. Take high-value pharmaceuticals. A classic example is urokinase, an enzyme used to dissolve dangerous blood clots.
A life-saving medication.
Yeah.
What makes it so hard to produce on Earth?
The ground-based separation from human urine, its source, is incredibly expensive, about $1,200 a dose. And the process is hampered by gravity, which causes sedimentation and convection currents that mix things up and reduce purity.
But in space?
In space, they looked at using a process called continuous flow electrophoresis.
That's separation based on electrical charge, right?
Yes. And without gravity messing things up, the separation is much cleaner. You get higher purity, higher yield. Researchers back then indicated that if the technology was scaled, space production could potentially satisfy the total world market for urokinase by 1995.
Wow. The other key high-value product you mentioned is perfect crystals for advanced electronics.
This moves beyond just purity. This is about structural perfection at the atomic level. Growing large, perfect crystals for semiconductors and high-power rectifiers is extremely difficult on Earth because gravity introduces these tiny imperfections or dislocations in the crystal structure as it solidifies.
And those imperfections are like little roadblocks for electrons.
They create undesirable hotspots and limit the crystal's current carrying capacity. In zero-G, you eliminate the mechanical stresses that cause those dislocations. You can grow perfect crystals of next-gen materials like silicon carbide or gallium nitride.
And the benefit of that cascades into solving a major terrestrial problem, right? Power delivery.
Precisely. Current AC transmission loses a lot of energy over long distances. High-efficiency DC power transmission cuts those losses, but you need extremely reliable high-power rectifiers. With dislocation-free devices grown in space, you could interconnect massive power grids across time zones.
So you could send solar energy from Texas to satisfy peak demand in New York.
Exactly. Alleviating brownouts, stabilizing the grid. The benefit of a perfect crystal grown in orbit is planetary grid stability.
This moves us into the ultimate long-term strategy for preserving Earth: industrial relocation, moving the heavy, polluting manufacturing off-world. And the most compelling part of that is space-based solar power, SPS.
SPS is the key option for delivering clean, abundant, continuous energy to Earth. These arrays are lit by the sun 2247, unlike solar farms on the ground. The engineering is colossal, but the long-term goal for a real impact would involve constructing about 100 SPS units.
And for scale, how big is that?
All 100 units combined would be roughly half the size of the state of Connecticut, which just underscores the need for ISAM and asteroidal materials. You could never launch all that from Earth.
Our sources also touched on other advanced energy concepts that use the space environment.
Yes, beyond SPS, there's the concept of lumeta-reflected light systems for night illumination of cities or agricultural areas. And then there's a really intriguing concept of fusion in space.
How does space help fusion?
Terrestrial fusion reactors struggle with impurities from the containment vessel walls. The hard vacuum of space is an intrinsic engineering advantage. It lets you put the container walls farther from the reaction, and if impurities get in, the vacuum can be restored quickly and easily. It solves a huge challenge for terrestrial fusion efforts.
Okay, finally, let's address the big question. Will all this space iron and nickel destroy the terrestrial steel industry?
Highly unlikely. And this is a really critical distinction to make.
Okay.
Terrestrial iron and nickel production is a colossal industry, well over 1 billion tons a year. Asteroid resources just can't compete with that bulk production because of the cost of bringing it back through the gravity well. Instead, space resources will create a new, distinct top tier of ultra-pure material.
Pure because the process eliminates terrestrial contaminants you can't avoid in Earth-based refining.
Precisely. This ultra-pure iron and nickel will spur innovation in next-generation alloys, specialized components. It will complement, not replace, the terrestrial bulk steel industry, driving specialized, high-margin innovation. So the transition to off-world abundance isn't just an economic change. It's a fundamental geopolitical realignment. When your resource wealth is decoupled from Earth's geography, access is determined by capital and technology, who can afford the launch and build the robots, not by who controls the territory.
That is the complete inversion of human history. Resources were always the reason for war and taking territory.
And that shift in leverage creates what we could call the inverted resource curse.
Okay, so the regular resource curse punished nations rich in territory but poor in governance.
And now the economic damage shifts to developing nations whose economies depend heavily on exporting terrestrial minerals.
So give us the real-world consequence. If the U.S. or China starts controlling asteroid mining, what happens to a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, or Indonesia?
Their economic foundations are put at severe risk. The DRC depends on cobalt exports, Indonesia on nickel. If technologically advanced nations flood the market with stable, massive supplies of those same metals from space, commodity prices will plummet.
And that sudden collapse.
It undermines the economic basis of those states, potentially leading to devastating social instability and a crisis of governance. Economic leverage shifts definitively from territory-rich nations to technology-rich nations.
Which means we need new international frameworks now.
Absolutely. We need them urgently before the first large influx of material to ensure the benefits are shared equitably and that the transition doesn't just make global inequality worse.
Now, we spent a lot of time on regulatory friction, but we should acknowledge that reform is possible. And when it happens, the benefits are immediate. The reform of commercial remote sensing regulations is a great modern example of that.
It is a clear success story. It was driven by that 2018 Space Policy Directive 2. Before that, the regulations imposed severe restrictions or conditions on U.S. companies to protect national security. It limited camera resolution, frequency of images.
Making them uncompetitive globally?
Exactly. And once those restrictions were lifted, the transformation was rapid. By August 2023, NOAA had removed 39 individual conditions. This liberated American firms to innovate, compete, and deploy enhanced capabilities.
And we saw the benefit of that with Ukraine.
A real-world example, yes. The utilization of these new high-resolution commercial capabilities almost immediately in support of Ukraine following the Russian invasion, it demonstrated the strategic value of removing that friction.
So focused reforms can work.
But then you have these perpetual challenges like the export control dilemma with ITAR, the international traffic and arms regulations.
ITAR is a long-standing challenge, and it's rooted in the military implications of space tech. In the late 90s, the U.S. decided to classify nearly all commercial satellites under ITAR.
Which meant selling a satellite, even to an ally, required immense bureaucracy.
And the economic fallout of that decision was staggering. Analysis showed that placing space tech under ITAR led to a massive 40% drop in the U.S. share of the global commercial space market since 1995.
Because competitors just marketed ITAR-free satellites.
Exactly. European companies gained massive market share just by offering easier sales. While reforms have eased some restrictions since the Obama administration, the dual-use nature of the tech means this is a constant source of friction.
And this perpetual friction creates the risk of companies essentially just jumping ship.
That is the flags of convenience risk. If the U.S. regulatory environment stays cumbersome and unpredictable, U.S. companies will logically seek out other jurisdictions with more permissible frameworks. New Zealand, for instance, created a very early, clear regulatory framework for satellite servicing operations.
And the consequence isn't just lost American jobs, it's a global safety risk.
Absolutely. If operations move to nations with less oversight, it risks U.S. leadership, and critically, it risks creating a less safe space environment for everyone. Fragmented regulation increases the operational risks for all space operators, including crucial government and military assets. The down friction has consequences far beyond U.S. borders.
We have to close this section by addressing the profound human cost of this industrial decoupling. Moving mining and manufacturing off-world alleviates severe environmental and social harms. We eliminate habitat destruction, hazardous labor, that's all good. But this shift creates a major structural social problem, the mass displacement of the global mining workforce.
It's the ethical dilemma embedded in the abundance paradigm. We are exchanging one form of human hardship for another, a less dangerous one, but still a hardship. The new space industry is knowledge-intensive. It's robotics, AI, remote operation, aerospace engineering. It is fundamentally not labor-intensive in the traditional sense.
Right. You cannot simply retrain a cobalt miner in the DRC to manage autonomous extractors from a control room in Silicon Valley. The skills are just not transferable.
They are structurally different and geographically different. Traditional mining supports entire rural and remote communities. The new space industry jobs, the design, the engineering, they are overwhelmingly concentrated in high-tech urban centers, far from where the terrestrial jobs are being lost.
Which creates these stranded communities and a stranded workforce.
Yes. These communities, often in politically sensitive or marginalized areas, they face generational poverty if their economic foundation suddenly vanishes. We can't just talk about the benefits of post-scarcity wealth in orbit while ignoring the terrestrial costs of this dislocation.
So what does this require from a policy perspective, especially from the nations that are becoming technology rich?
It demands massive, proactive, long-term investment in what are called just transition policies. That means funding large-scale worker retraining, investing in education in vulnerable regions, and proactively diversifying those local economies decades in advance. If we fail to address this structural challenge, we risk generating immense instability, fueling resentment, and creating cycles of poverty that undermine the very goals of space abundance, which is to benefit all of humanity. When we integrate these sophisticated models of the Earth economy with the astronomical potential of the space economy, you see, the core conflict isn't really a zero-sum game. It's a choice between two futures. Stagnation is quantifiable. It carries a risk of up to $2 trillion in losses from ecological collapse. Expansion is also quantifiable. It promises multi-billion-dollar annual gains from intelligent nature investment and quadrillions in potential wealth from off-world resources. The pursuit of the up frontier and the preservation of the down cradle, they aren't mutually exclusive. They are, in fact, two halves of the only viable long-term strategy for global prosperity.
That is the necessary choice that's before us. Space industrialization provides the only realistic path to simultaneously create material wealth for all humankind and transform Earth into the ecological preserve it deserves to be, by systematically relocating heavy and polluting manufacturing into orbit and beyond. This pursuit of the high frontier is driven by a deep economic engine, the creation of new, unlimited wealth. The focus has to be on ensuring that the benefits of space abundance, from clean energy and perfect materials to geopolitical stability, are brought quickly and decisively into the social and economic mainstream, accruing the greatest percentage benefits to the inhabitants of the poorest nations on Earth and enabling the long view of a post-scarcity future. That future is one where the fundamental purpose of our species shifts away from the grim necessity of survival and territorial conflict toward innovation, creativity, and the fulfillment of our greatest potential.